Hey folks, I'm going to move through a brief publishing primer. I talk about publishing a lot here, so if you see a publishing session, I do many, and talking about a lot of facets of publishing, but I realize the thing I rarely ever talk about is like the basics of publishing, like what submitting to a journal is like and what happens when you submit to a journal. So we're going to go over some of that today. So this is me, Mike Nason. I hope you're well, despite the profound horrors of modern life. I'm your Open Scholarship and Publishing Librarian. My job is about helping make research as accessible to the public or relevant research communities as you would want them to be. It's not just about open access, but making sure people can see research as best as possible. Whether that's due to funding mandates or personal interest or capitulation or whatever, and it's very specifically what I'm here for. So feel free to ask any questions if you are ever curious. I'm here to help. It is literally my job. And these are some other things that I also talk about: research data management, tri-agency requirements, scholar profiles, digital publishing, open infrastructure, persistent identifiers, just a whole bunch of stuff. So for the next some-ish minutes, I don't really know how many, it's going to be some, that's for sure. I'm going to take a swing at introducing you to the world of scholarly publishing in a way that is, I hope, useful. And the hope is that we'll emerge better equipped to understand what may become a big part of your career moving forward. I have a little bit of a student empowerment corner here. There's a lot of things in academia that'll be presented to you throughout your studies as sort of prescriptive or rigid or immutable. This is just kind of the way things are, people will say. This is especially true in a lot of topics related to publishing, but the field has really changed quite a bit over the last 2 decades. You have supervisors or advisors for whom the landscape has shifted tremendously from the time that they started. What I want you to understand more than anything is that very few things in academia are set in stone. Contrary to specific bad faith mania drummed up by right-wing pundits and ghouls, academia is actually a generally conservative place that's slow to change. Things can take a really long time. Cultural change in particular can take a very long time. But if you ask your instructors or advisors, they'll tell you that things are very different than they were even a decade ago. Broadly, researchers learn about publishing from their advisors while they're starting out with the process themselves. So it's very rare, I think especially historically, for people to have learned about publishing from like a class on publishing or instructions specific to publishing. Generally what happens is someone will go through a process where maybe they're working on a conference presentation related to their thesis or dissertation work, and they'll give a presentation at the conference and they'll have their proceeding published, and that's their first publication. Or maybe they'll be working on publishing an article from a master's thesis or a dissertation or something along those lines. But the very first time you publish, you're not going to know a lot about it, and the way that people learn about this is they just ask their advisor. And that's generally the way that this goes. Researchers often learn about publishing by doing it. You can spend an entire master's degree without anyone ever talking to you about how publishing works. I know, it's happened to me twice, where I've gotten all the way through a master's degree, and at the end, someone's like, so do you want to publish? And I'm like, what does that mean? What are you talking about? So it's something that's actually kind of buried. This isn't really bad necessarily, but it does mean you're learning about publishing from 1 or 2 specific people who learned from a few specific people themselves and so on. This is a kind of like folk wisdom about publishing. It's also a little like how you inherit emotional baggage from your parents. If you have a situation where you're learning about publishing from somebody who had a bad experience from one publisher, they will tell you that that publisher isn't to be trusted, or some other thing. They'll have some small amount of experience. All the reasons that people kind of have to have perceived biases about the ways someone published, you're going to get that probably like 2 or 3 orders of magnitude back. And it's a very narrow understanding of what publishing is and what kind of options you have in publishing. One thing I'd like you to know is you have more agency than a lot of folks in academia might let on. People will tell you these are the journals you're supposed to publish in. This is what publishing is supposed to look like. But ultimately, you have that agency. It is your call where you publish, and your work is your work until you decide otherwise. What you do with your work is your business. So let's talk a little bit about scholarly communications. Throughout an undergraduate degree and for a good chunk of a graduate degree, this is what publishing, like the workflow kind of looks like. You read publications, you get an idea related to a class or assignment, you write your paper, you move on with your life. You never really think about that paper ever again. Researchers don't necessarily have this same thing going on. There are lots of other things that you could potentially be sharing. In modern publishing, it actually looks a lot more like this. So in the top left corner here, we've got ideas. So you're brainstorming and thinking about what you want to publish. You move on to the planning cycle where you've got research planning, grant applications. You're trying to figure out your proposals and stuff like that. You get a research concept. You move on to the experiment where you're now managing a grant. You're handling funding. You've hired research assistants. You've got data and outputs. You're trying to meet whatever compliance or regulations you need for the varying things you're working on. And then you get your conclusions. From your conclusions, you go on to drafting a work, which can be submitted to an article as a preprint or put in any other number of places. It goes through a process of peer review, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then the work gets published. And then after it's published, it moves on to stuff like preservation. You have to communicate that you did the work. You have to talk about having done the work with people. You have to maybe do some conference presentations about your work. You have to do work related to grant conclusions, final reports, and ultimately disseminating that work to who needs to see it. It goes out to the global scholarly community. Those people read it, they have ideas, and so on. So it's this constant circular behavior where at any point there are products of this work you may want to share or publish. Maybe you want to share a data set, or maybe you want to share a preprint, or maybe you want to share the published version of a work. But it's more than just like you write the thing, you publish it, and you move on. It's this much more circular universe. And that's a whole lot of material generated by researchers. Wouldn't it be a shame if no one saw any of it? So the objective is to try to share as much of your work as you can. The whole point of scholarship is for at least some people to see your work and for your work to make some kind of difference. I think usually, I guess for some people, I mean, I've definitely gotten a degree just to get the letter. Sometimes it's just to make more money, but ultimately the objective is for that work to make some kind of difference. And for ideally as many people as possible to see your work while you're at it. Publishing and sharing research is a hugely important part of an academic career. So I don't know how familiar you are with this, and I know for most of my undergraduate and graduate degrees, kind of less so in my graduate degree, I really didn't appreciate the fact that my professors are publishing constantly, and their ratings and their tenure and promotion process and their career is so much more weighted on what they publish than how they teach a class. When you're an undergraduate, you might have a professor you hate who you think is truly awful at teaching, and it turns out it really doesn't matter. The research part is the big part. But when we're in classes learning about how to disseminate work and write papers and stuff, we don't spend that much time talking about how we're going to share it, and that's actually the part that matters more than many of the other things we study. So let's talk a little bit about sharing work. So as I alluded to, publishing has changed quite a bit over the last couple decades. That sounds like a long time, but when you consider whole generations of researchers and how long people spend in the profession, it's actually been pretty zippy. One of the things I'd like you to think about when you're publishing is this idea of publishing with intention. That you can publish in a place you want to publish in, that you think about where you want to publish before you submit. I think for some people it's a bit of an afterthought, like these are the 5 journals I'm supposed to submit to, I'll submit to these 5 journals, and that's it. You don't really worry about do they get to keep my copyright? Do they have a charge for me to submit to this place? You just know that these are the places you submit, and you submit to those places without really being too concerned. But if you publish with intention, you think about this stuff before you submit your work. I also need you to understand that every discipline has a different publishing culture and that your approach to research isn't universal. There are all kinds of different publications. Some disciplines move through research and publish at a really quick pace, like in physics, for example, or some aspects of engineering. It can take a year between the time you submit your work to a journal and for it to be published. For some physicists, by the time their work is published, it's already out of date. They publish so quickly that time it takes from toe to tip, it's already irrelevant. People have moved on to the next thing. We call this a short tail. Fast research where the window of relevance is more immediate and iterative within a field of study. But there's also long tails. For example, in history and in English, you write a monograph, you write a book. It takes you way longer to write, but it's relevant for decades because it's a seminal work that covers a longer period of time. Try not to fall into the trap of assuming that the way you work is the way everyone else does. So if you're talking to another friend who is a student or another friend who is a colleague and they say, yeah, I'm really working on these proceedings, and you go like, well, in my field, proceedings aren't really that important. Well, in computer science, they're huge. So every discipline kind of has a different approach to what they consider valuable and how they publish. Publishing itself is about submission, rejection, peer review, rejection, and ego and prestige. We'll talk a little bit about the process of working through a journal application, submitting your work to a journal. So generally speaking, the workflow is you're getting close to finishing a paper you're drafting either by yourself or with a few others. and you start to need to think about where you're going to submit it. So you've been working on this research paper for a while, you've done some drafts, it's starting to look like it might have a shape that makes some sense. So you have to pick a journal to submit it to. Just one. You can't submit to a bunch of journals at once. You can only submit to one at a time. You might have an idea of where you'd like to submit based on the work of journals you read or happened to go to a lot while you were doing your work. So you might have an idea like, well, I read this journal a lot when I was doing this research. It seems like this would be a sensible place for me to submit my work. Your advisor might know some good submission options. A subject librarian might know some good submission options. Probably don't just Google like good journal. That's like a real big mistake. A lot of places that are sort of like bad faith publishers are very good at search engine optimization, and they will end up higher in the queue. So don't just Google give me a good journal, but instead look for other things. You're going to want to look for the journal first, because they're going to have things like word count limits and formatting requirements, citation style requirements, and any other number of criteria. When you start this whole process before the paper is finished, then you're thinking of your paper as like a really nice draft that you take and then apply all of these rules to. So I've definitely been in a situation where I have an article draft ready to go, we find a place to submit to, and then our paper's like 800 words over the word limit for that journal, and then you've got to cut way down. So it helps to know where you're thinking about submitting that research before you finish the paper. The journal you choose will have a page on their site showing you all of these requirements. It'll probably have a software platform you'll need to register for to do the submission. If you're ever curious about this, you can sign up for the Public Library of Science PLOS journals. You can sign up for an account for free. Just walk through what a submission is like. You'll be pushed through this form and probably be asked a bunch of questions you've literally never thought about in your life until now, like how is your research stored and how all these other things about your data. But it's good to kind of go through the process to see what it's like to submit to a journal. And it's free to sign up for these platforms. Just sign up for PLOS and run through a submission and get a sense as to what people are being asked in this space. Take time to think about these questions too. I definitely know people who just sort of see these and go like, well, I'll just skip this. I don't know what it is. But do take the time to think about what the questions are. A bunch of stuff is going to happen to your paper while you wait to hear back about submissions. So an editor or a section editor for the journal, and hopefully not some AI application, which is happening in places like Springer, will review your paper to see if it's a good enough fit with the journal to send it to peer review. Journals have this thing called like a focus and scope, which tells you the kinds of things they want to publish in their journal. And so they'll make sure that your article is a good fit with what they're hoping to have. They'll tell you if it's rejected at this step, and if it is, it's called a desk rejection. Don't be ashamed if you get a desk rejection. They're very common. You submit to a journal and someone goes, this is not a good fit for this issue, or another journal might be better. They haven't even sent it to peer review yet. They're just saying, you know, we're not totally sure about this. And those are super, super common, very normal to get desk rejected. You just find another journal to submit to. Peer review is the longer version of the waiting game, except at the end, you either get rejected or a list of things that you'll need to fix. An editor or a section editor for the journal will then try to find a peer reviewer for your paper. They do this by asking a lot of people very nicely if they'd be willing to do the peer review, and if so, by which date. No one does peer review on time, generally speaking. It's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration. It's not a fast process. And no one responds to a peer review request quickly. I know whenever I've received one, it sits in my inbox unread because I know the implications of agreeing to do it. So it just sits. So this stuff is a pretty slow process. And at least one of these reviewers will say something very mean about your work. Don't take it personally. It's not uncommon to have a couple very positive reviews and then have one person who slam dunks on you from outer space and makes you feel very bad. Totally normal. Don't stress out about it. But this takes a long time, this process. Assuming your revisions are up to snuff, an editor will decide whether or not you either have your paper sent to copy editing or you have to pass through a second round of peer review to affirm that you and the journal have done their due diligence. So sometimes it's the case where you'll go through all of this process, you'll submit new revisions, and then someone will go, we're going to put it through another round of peer review. And they get other peer reviewers, and they go back through it again. So that process that I already said was long can now take doubly long. It's possible to pass through multiple rounds of peer review. They do generally take as long every time you do them. Once your paper is approved, you'll have to wait for it to move through the publication workflow. These vary by publisher and by organization. Copy editing and layout will happen, and you'll be roped into the process as it moves along. And eventually, you'll be sent a proof for final approval. They'll say, this is the version that we're going to publish. Is everything OK? Double check. And then the work will eventually be published. Either it'll be released prior to an issue publication. You've probably seen this in your research, the phrase like online first or first online. It's like, it's not specifically in an issue. It's like a list of articles that came out before the issue. Or it'll just be straight up attached to an issue. By this point, a year or more might have passed since you submitted your paper, depending on the journal and any other number of things. So you get a desk rejection or two. Those take a couple months. So it could be a year to 2 years from the time you finish your paper and submit to the time that a work is published. This is what has happened to more or less every journal article you've read throughout your entire education, which is a weird thing to think about. Like, I know when I was like working on a paper or working on my thesis, sometimes I go digging through journal articles and I would find like one article and I was like, oh, this is great. They're making this argument and I've been looking for this kind of thing. I'll put a quote in, here's my citation. And then it takes me 10 minutes to go like, okay, this is the thing I want. This is exactly the research I was looking for. I'm very happy and I cite it. That was a year of a person's life. And I've just like dipped in and grabbed the information and hit the road. But this is what academic publishing is. Publishing itself used to be relatively straightforward. You'd ask these questions: where to publish? Is this a good journal? Does it have a good reputation in my field? Will my community of practice read it? Will it be well cited? Am I in good company? Is this a publisher of good repute? This idea of a presumption of access. The people who are interested in this research will be able to see it. The best journals in my field are generally available for this research community to read. You're absolutely not going to know all of these things, but other people have been in your shoes. So you can talk to librarians, you can talk to other researchers in your field, you can talk to colleagues, you can talk to advisors. Other people can give you information here. But sometimes it isn't straightforward. Publications of repute typically don't come looking for you. So one of the things that happens in submission to an article, the word submission is very key. Often people refer to the phrase predatory journals, and I call them bad faith journals because I think most publishers are pretty predatory. But the idea is you'll be solicited to submit to a journal, and what they're hoping to get is an APC. Most journals do not do that. Soliciting is not a thing that typically happens. As a grad student, you will increasingly start to get emails that maybe have scraped a website that includes your thesis name or some other. Oh, article processing charge. It's a charge to publish that costs like $3,500 American. They're really high. Often tied to the OA movement. It's a way publishers make money back on open access. They suck. So publishers will not come looking for you. So this is one thing that, again, doesn't get talked a lot about to grad students, especially right after they graduate. You'll start getting these emails saying like, boy, you're a real, we love your work, you're a big genius. And then pasted in the name of your thesis. And then like, we love you to publish in such and such Vanity Press. And you're like, boy, I must be great. This is so great. None of that stuff is real. Don't do that. It's not good. You have to submit to a journal. You submit to a journal and are vetted. That's how that workflow happens. Academic publishing is a hugely lucrative industry. We'll just talk about a little bit what happens here. So the university pays researchers, and then the researchers do research, they write and submit work, they do peer review, and they do editorial. And they do all of that as part of their job as like, I'm a researcher who works at an institution. It's just my job to do this kind of stuff. So journals don't pay you to do peer review. Peer review is part of your job as an academic who does this work. So you get one line of pay for research, writing and submitting work, peer review, and editorial. You submit that work to publishers. The publishing workflow happens here, so the publisher sort of manage the publishing workflow, but the peer review and editorial both happen as a result of the researcher. And then you have copy editing and layout. This is the thing publishers do legitimately do. It does take time and effort. This is the thing that actually costs real money that they do. Then the work gets published, and then the university buys access to the content. So we pay all the money for the people to make all of the stuff. Publishers do a little copy editing and layout and dissemination, and then we buy it back for incredibly exorbitant prices. Publishers make, on average, like big ones like Elsevier, they have like a 40% profit margin. They make insane amounts of money. So that's just a little bit about what's happening there. By and large, there are 4 sort of narratives that happen in this space that you need to know about. One is open access. Who knows what open access is, or is at least familiar with the term? Oh my God, incredible. I love it. Awesome, thank you. So open access is this idealistic movement based on the idea that increased access to information will in turn provide more equality and equity in scholarship worldwide. There are lots of places that just can't read published research because it costs so much to access that the knowledge is just not accessible to people and to the public, right? Like the public in New Brunswick can't read most of the research that happens at this institution because it's behind a paywall. So the idea is that people should engage with open access because it is a moral good and information wants to be free. So this emphasis on open access has had a huge influence on the publishing industry. Being priced out of journals means you're priced out of knowledge. Schools with money are often in the global north. Schools in the global south have a hard time paying for all these things. Publicly funded research should be available to the public. This is huge. If you get a grant from the Canadian government, the tri-agency, they want to make sure that taxpayer money is readable by those same people. So these rules about publicly funded research being available to the public are definitely important in publishing. But journals rely on subscriptions for revenue, and publishing isn't free. Copyediting and layout are labor, and distribution is labor, and web design and hosting. Publishers have a vested interest in maintaining their significant revenues. If a journal wants to operate with no subscription costs, it typically needs money from another source, and that has traditionally been, or more recently been, the APC, the article processing charge. Then bad faith publishers. So all of this mania about open access that sort of got all these people publishing in open access and going, boy, we should really get away from big publishing and we should take all this stuff back. Well, some unscrupulous folks figured a few things out. They figured out that researchers are under the gun to publish or perish. Open access appears to be trendy. People don't really know OA journals as well. They're new, so someone's looking for a new place to publish and they look for an open access journal and they're just digging around on Google and they find some place to publish. All of this is complicated enough that you can get someone to pay an APC for fast peer review you have no intention to do. So I call these bad faith journals because they're not really, or even just scam journals. A lot of the time they have no interest in doing the work of publishing. They're not doing copy editing and layout. They're not vetting the work. They're just taking a PDF and they're taking your money and then they put it up on a website. So they're not really publishers. They're just websites kind of meant to trick people. So I don't use the phrase predatory because I think major publishers are just as predatory, but this is a thing that emerged because of this push to open access and the high cost of access to materials. And then there's mandates, as I mentioned, governments insisting that work be made OA. Which brings us back to the APC. So a lot of publishers now put OA at the forefront, right? They say, well, you're under mandate. You have to share your work because it's publicly funded. So if you just give us this money, we'll just take care of it for you. They just sort of ask for that money up front. They say, this is the only path to open access. And it isn't. There are normally lots of other paths to open access. Sharing other versions of the work that aren't the final published version, very common. Usually you can share some other version without spending money. But it's really taken over the narrative about what open access is. People just assume it costs them money out of pocket. Publishers have successfully managed to monetize OA on top of their existing subscription fees. It really stinks. So there's a bunch of trends here, but we're low on time. I won't go over all of them, but there's a lot going on. The one thing that I would highlight here is many authors are being made aware of the fact that they don't own their work after it's been published. Part of publishing means you sign a publication agreement where you give copyright to the publisher. And for a lot of people, it's like an afterthought. You don't really think about doing it because you're getting published, so you just sign the document. But then if you try to reuse your own text or images, you can be charged by that publisher for doing that thing. I have a professor here in physics who tried to reuse a graph for another publication, and the publisher asked him for $500 to reuse his own graph. So you sign over when you publish. You sign over copyright of your work to those people. It is not your work anymore. It is their work. So that's a big piece. Peer review itself is evolving to become more open or otherwise transparent. So sometimes peer review now happens in the open, in a process called open peer review, where instead of it being anonymous and you don't know who's reviewing your work, sometimes this happens in the commons. The AI question is really big in publishing, and I would really watch for this. It's causing a profound volume of problems across copyright and plagiarism detection, peer review, and authorship. So I mentioned before, some publishers like Springer are using AI to do the initial vetting of a publication. So you send it in, AI is doing the desk rejection. So they basically ask ChatGPT if your article's good, and you get denied by ChatGPT instead of a person. ChatGPT doesn't know things, so it can't know if your research is good. It's just putting words in order. But this is happening, and it really stinks. Another thing that's happening is some people are feeding their peer review requirements into ChatGPTs. Like, well, I'll agree to do the peer review, but I'll just feed it into an LLM, and I'll get the result out. And so there's a lot of this stuff happening, or people aren't, they write a work and they use LLMs when they do it, and they don't declare it to the journal. Some journals have, what do they call it? Like you declare that you've used AI in your work so they know it's coming. They have policies around how you use AI. So just be sort of careful in this space about any number of things. And remember, I guess, that being a human with a human brain is good. All this stuff is very bad. Another thing that happened, and I mentioned this copyright piece, Taylor and Francis sold the entire corpus of everything they've ever published as training data to LLMs without talking to the authors who had originally written the work. So all these authors every author that had ever written anything for Taylor and Francis found their work being used to train an AI. But because Taylor and Francis owned the work, there was nothing they could do about it. It's just really, it really sucks. What I need you to take away here is that publishing is about submission and rejection, review, rejection, and ego. Real journals don't solicit. There's an enormous volume of gray area with questionable publishers that may have credible quality journals. Figuring out what a good journal is takes work. You need to spend time and read an article or two, read an issue or two, figure out if the journal's legitimate, if you'd be proud to have your work put in that place. Really important. So now we have all these other questions. We have all these ones from before, but then we have questions like, is this a real journal? How many retractions does it have? Is it predatory? Is the journal kind of okay, but the publisher isn't? Why am I paying for publishing? Who's hitting a paywall when they try to read it? Is it open access? Am I under mandate? Do I need to pay for publishing? What kinds of works can I find where? Then if I share a link, who hits a paywall? And then what to publish? Do I want to share preprints or accepted manuscripts, publisher PDFs? Do I want subsets of my research data or all of my research data? And can I have the same presumption of access, that I am publishing to a group of people, a community of people who will be able to read it? I use this example a lot for education, which is a field that Marc knows quite well. A lot of work published by people in the education faculty, if you're publishing, say, in early child literacy, and you're hoping that practitioners and educators in our province will have access to that work and it's behind a paywall, it's definitely not happening. New Brunswick's Department of Education is not shelling out for journal subscriptions. So if you want your work to matter to practitioners who don't have access to that work, you should have at least some version of it be open access to make that difference for people in the public sphere. I'll acknowledge these decisions are non-trivial and probably overwhelming. That's okay. There are people here to help you, and also you have agency. These are ultimately your decisions. Where and how you share your research affects the impact your work has in your research community and the public. Please publish with intention. It is absolutely worth asking yourself if you want to support a specific publisher or journal. We often hear the phrase, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, especially if you spend time with me, but there is, I think, a case to be made for ethical publishing in academia. And you need to think about who gets copyright and whether or not you're okay with that. The rest of this deck, Marc, we can have a link to this. Yeah, I'll include a link to the slide deck with it, but there's resources on how to find publisher policies, who to contact for help, and also a lot of information about people in this space, what else we can help with, other bookmarks and contacts for people who can help with varying things related to publishing, and the names of people who work in publishing work and RDM work and other things in this space. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you want to talk about publishing stuff. Librarians love nothing more than the acknowledgement of their existence. So thank you for that. I know that was fast. That's just kind of how I operate.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about professional development opportunities for graduate students. And by professional development, I basically mean opportunities that you might have to develop skills that allow you to leverage and apply your content or discipline-specific learning in a professional or a job context. So for some of you who are currently teaching or imagine that they will be professors, maybe that would be the diploma of university teaching. And for others, it might be learning specific software, or if you're in the hard sciences, maybe some hardware that you need to learn that would give you some benefit moving forward. And I know there's even graduate students that take Toastmasters so that they can learn to communicate a little bit better. And that's what knowledge mobilization is about as a professional development learning opportunity. And so by knowledge mobilization, I basically mean combining technologies and your personalities in order to exert some sort of influence, be that influence on a prospective employer or prospective funder or the general public or maybe client behavior, whatever it might be. And in this particular case, we're talking about some workshops that we have. Developing these sorts of skills can be a lot of work for people who are already very busy. So how does that factor into your own life? Well, I'm going to use Mike and myself as an example of that. This is us from the summer before I cut my hair. Basically, we've been playing music together for the better part of 15 or 20 years now, and I remember in the early days when we started, neither of us were particularly excited about being on stage. It was more of a frightening thing, and the same with giving presentations and that sort of thing. And the only thing that really helped us overcome that is putting in the work, repetition, and ideally fun. And so what we try to do here at the Harriet Irving Library Research Commons in person and also in some virtual settings when we're helping students who aren't on this campus or maybe that are in St. John, is provide opportunities that give people a chance to meet people in other disciplines. You kind of enlarge your sense of what UNB is all about and make sure that the projects have some sort of personal meaning And so it's not just something that's templated, but something that people contribute to and get a chance to feel that they see themselves in both the processes and the production. And so we provide workshops, and we also provide opportunities to develop and deepen the learning that begins in those settings. So here we have some examples of some video workshops that we've done, as well as some things that happen in our fabrication lab, which is a makerspace here around knowledge representation. So I'm just going to talk about 3 in particular types of workshops that we offer, and also emphasize again that if you don't attend one of UNB's physical campuses, there's still opportunities to reach out to us and get personalized help. So podcasting, or basically audio projects. So for some people it might be that you're interested in being able to communicate your research or talk to people who are in your field or outside of your field in order to spread the message about whatever you're doing to a broader audience, but maybe you haven't had the opportunity to learn technologies and techniques. And so that's the sort of thing that we would go through in workshops like this. We start by talking about how the nature of listening, of sound, requires a certain type of communication and a certain type of writing and performance of that, and then talk about the properties and physics of sound and how you have to account for that in the technologies that you might use. And we're also offering a LinkedIn badging opportunity around this, where after you attend the workshops, if you embark on a capstone project of some sort, then you deepen your learning through practice, and you can display that in a LinkedIn context. So there's also people who might be doing some interviews for their theses or dissertations, actually going out in the field and talking to people. There's nothing more impactful, I think, than taking a transcript and actually bringing it to life with the actual tone of voice that people have. It really makes whatever people are saying much more meaningful to a listener or an audience. So that is one opportunity. We also have a podcast called UNB in 30, 30-minute journeys toward 2030, which is the strategic plan that UNB has. And one of our projects is to go out and speak to researchers who are studying the Woolastook, or commonly known as the St. John River, from different disciplinary perspectives. And so we're hoping to continue to develop graduate student-specific podcasts, reaching out to students who would be interested in interviewed, but also for students who would actually like to be a host. So these are participatory opportunities all around. We also offer a filmmaking workshop, which takes you through the language of cinema that we have all grown up with, but haven't actually perhaps had an opportunity to use ourselves. This is a shot of our filmmaker studio that I self-took yesterday. And so this is a bookable space on the Fredericton campus. However, there's a lot of principles that go into this setup that can be replicated in virtually any environment you can imagine. And so if, again, you are a student working off of campus, or you're just going to be going off campus to do a lot of work, there's consultation and in some cases equipment provision that we can help you with as well. And this is also a LinkedIn badging opportunity. With the addition that we have periodically throughout the year, actual film shoots where we solicit graduate student participation, whether in front of or behind the camera, in order to get a little bit more experience. One of those, for example, is our Over-Under series, where we invite in graduate students to weigh in on some fun topics, like, well, fun, like the city transit in Fredericton, or different trends going on in the world, and they tell us whether they think they're over or underrated. But it's an opportunity, like with Ruth Mammon, who was a Masters of Education student who, like increasing numbers of students, was interested in submitting video assignments rather than traditional assignments where permitted. It gave her an opportunity to be in front of the camera and get a little bit more comfortable and be able to review what she is doing in anticipation of going out and doing that actual for-credit work. So we have some fun opportunities like that. It might not seem fun initially, but when people actually get a chance It might be that you've never needed or been drawn to finding yourself in front of a camera and having to speak, but it's like any other skill, it's something that can be developed. And oftentimes it's a question of becoming comfortable, but also comfortable with the discomfort of the adrenaline in your body when you find yourself on the spot. And the only way you can deal with that is by getting exposure. We have a fabrication lab here on campus as well, which is an opportunity to either prototype or create promotional materials around projects that you might have, or develop knowledge representation models that bring to life and concretize in a tangible way some of the ideas that you're working on that can then be objectively discussed and shared. So we have various projects with that. Again, if you're working off campus, we're always happy to consult on that. And again, when this presentation is streamable online, we'll give you some links and some tips around that. So coming up this fall, this is already underway, but it's going to be a monthly repetition. There'll be the podcasting, audio projects workshop, the introduction to video making. If there is interest, because there are, when you start to look at this, there's different associations that are tied to particular disciplines that solicit video submissions to different challenges that they put out, or you might be called upon to create a video or an audio summation or discussion of your work, or a pitch if you're working on a particular product or idea, then that's something that we could look at as well. But having said that, I often meet one-on-one with students. Whoever approaches me, I'm always available because that's a big part of my job. We'll be having some practical shoots, as I mentioned, individual group consultations, and also 3D design and printing workshops. The next one happening October 23rd on a Friday here on the Fredericton campus.